Greetings, my friends. I am so delighted to be with you as part of this exciting meditation conference. I just feel so much resonance with so much about South Korea. You have such a dynamic and creative culture. There's such a vital exchange of ideas and openness. And of course, your rich Buddhist heritage. I've personally been influenced by great Korean masters, including Chinul, and as some of you might know, along with my colleague Jack Cornfield, I offer a meditation teacher training program, and I'm honored to have a number of students from South Korea who are gaining their certification with us. So many, many connections. And I also want to say I'm aware of how, as contemporary societies, the United States and South Korea face many of the same challenges, and predominantly the emotional suffering that's so pervasive in our countries, the loneliness and depression, the anxiety, the suicide of celebrities and teens. It's a deep tragedy. And as many of you know, in these times of global crisis, there's also a real potential for transformation in consciousness. When there's crisis, there can be transformation. And this is why this gathering is so important. We need the wisdom and the compassion of Buddhist practices and teachings to help seed the grounds of a more peaceful, compassionate world. You know, one of the great misunderstandings in some Buddhist cultures is that Buddhism doesn't address the universal experience of emotional suffering. And this suffering has been considered psychological, as if it's something separate from the concerns of Buddhism. Yet if we look back to the Buddha, there are so many stories of the Buddha bringing practices to the psychological realm and to human relations. He guided people whose children had died. He worked in deeply healing ways with the depressed, with those who were violent and angry, those struggling with fear, those who were dying. And he was actively engaged in the larger society, seeking peace, sitting between communities and villages fighting each other in war. There are beautiful Mahayana texts on compassion and self-compassion. And South Korea has this treasure house that can be brought forward, that can be featured. So a crucial question for our times is, how do we bring the medicine of Dharma into a modern world in a healing way? In Western Buddhism, this is something we're focusing on a lot. And as many of you know, in the United States, there's a strong presence of all three major schools: Tibetan, Mahayana, Theravadan. And what we've witnessed is that a common denominator has emerged in the West, in these three schools, a common denominator which has a strong emphasis on compassion, on compassionate living, what many might call the feminine spiritual archetype. And it shows up in four major ways that I wanted to name. One of the ways it shows up in the West is an emphasis on the heart practices like compassion and forgiveness, loving kindness, gratitude. And the second way is a lot of attention to mindful communication, to relationship, this conscious intention to cultivate Sangha, spiritual community. So the third way that this shows up, that we see this kind of emphasis on compassion, is in engaged Buddhism. It's called engaged or spiritually based activism, which really means drawing on our roots in compassion, our dedication to ethics, and then responding actively to the incredible danger in terms of our climate and our Earth's environment, and responding to racial and other forms of violence, racial violence and ethnic violence, responding to economic injustice, and that includes cruelty to non-human animals. So that's another emphasis in the West. And the fourth that I want to name of these ways of compassion being centralized, that's very key in Western Buddhism, is the focus of this series of talks that I'll be doing with you. And that is how Buddhist meditation practices can transform emotional distress and reveal our true nature. So in that spirit, my friends, the 4 sessions that I'll be offering, I will be introducing a practice that has become extremely popular in Western Buddhism. It's called the rain meditation, and it's a weave of mindfulness and compassion that can radically transform difficult emotions and bring great healing and spiritual awakening. We'll start this session looking at how rain addresses a very core domain of suffering, and that's the suffering of self-aversion, self-hate, shame, the feelings of bad self. Now, in other sessions, in the other 3 sessions, we'll look at fear, anger, blaming others, and how rain can cultivate a boundless compassion. And with each, we'll end with a guided meditation. And you might find it helpful after the guided meditation to do some journaling, to write down what stands out in your experience. And if you have friends or colleagues who are participating in this course, it'll help to deepen your experience, to connect and talk about what you've noticed. Now, as a way of introducing rain, I'd like to share a story some of you might remember of an enormous clay statue of the Buddha that was located just north of Thailand's ancient capital of Sukhothai. And it had been there for centuries. And it wasn't the most handsome statue, wasn't particularly refined, but it was revered locally for its staying power. It had survived great storms and invading armies and many changes of government. In the 1950s, it began to crack, and due to hot, dry weather, one crack was wide enough so that a monk could take his flashlight and peer into the crack. And what shined back at him was the flash of brilliant gold. So as he and other monks looked into the other cracks, they discovered that inside the statue, inside those coverings, was one of the largest, most luminous gold images of the Buddha ever created in Southeast Asia. Now, the monks believed that this work of art had been covered with the plaster and clay to protect it from harm during periods of conflict and unrest. And in a similar way, we humans encounter difficulty, and we cover over our innate purity with our defenses, our ways of protecting ourselves, but so much so that we forget our essential nature. So this really reflects the most basic teachings of the Buddha, that we suffer because we forget who we are. We suffer because we forget who we are. We think we're the coverings, our personality, our ego self, and we forget the gold. And when we're narrowly identified and we forget the truth of who we are, we tend to judge ourselves and not like ourselves. And similarly, when we look at others, we just see the coverings. We don't see the gold in them either. Over the last 4 decades of working with my own heart and mind and with students and with clients, I've seen that the deepest suffering people experience is from self-aversion, from the sense that this body or mind or personality is flawed or bad or deficient. And with that sense of deficiency comes a fear of personal failure, an intolerance for making mistakes, a need to prove ourselves. And even when we're not consciously judging ourselves, there's an underlying sense of falling short, of never enough. You know, I saw a cartoon some years ago of a dog who was telling his psychotherapist his troubles. And what he was saying was, it's always good dog this and good dog that, but is it ever great dog? And we know how feelings of deficiency can really show up in all domains, whether it's falling short at work or in our relationships as parents, on the spiritual path. You know, when I teach in live groups, I often ask people how many feel they judge themselves too much. And most people raise their hand. Most of us know we judge ourselves too much. But what people don't often realize is how many moments of their life are actually being shaped by this fear of failing, this feeling of chronic deficiency. And that's why I call it the trance of unworthiness. It's a trance, which it's like a dream. A trance means that we're living in a confined, distorted, constricted experience. We're living inside very limiting beliefs about ourselves, and it cuts us off from a larger reality. I remember years ago a friend telling me about sitting with her mother as her mother was dying. And her mother's last words were, "All my life I thought something was wrong with me." That's what she said. And then she closed her eyes and she died. And for my friend, it was a bit of a dying gift because she realized it doesn't have to be like this. We don't have to go through our life moments with that background sense of falling short. But the first thing is we have to recognize that we're actually in a trance a lot of the time. We have to recognize how that background of something is wrong with me, that background is there. And if you investigate difficult emotions, if you're feeling a sense of depression, or anxiety, or hurt, what you'll find is that along with them comes some sort of an aversion towards our inner life. It's not just I'm depressed, it's I'm depressed and I don't like my depressed self. It's not just that we're anxious, it's that I'm anxious and I don't like my anxious self. And the fundamental truths, the most fundamental truths are the ones that we forget. And one is that we can't be happy, we can't love life if we're turned against ourselves, if we're at war with ourselves. So many wonder, and they ask me a lot, well, what makes this such a pervasive suffering? How come so many of us are caught up in self-judgment? And on the existential level, the primary mood of a separate self is fear. If we perceive separation, we're going to feel fear. There's a sense that either something's wrong or something's about to go wrong, that we're threatened. And for humans, with our thinking mind and our self-consciousness, that sense of something's wrong very quickly becomes, I am wrong. We make that shift very quickly. A good example is, and this is something shown in research, is that young children who are victims of incest or physical abuse think it's their fault. They think they did something wrong to cause it. Fixating on personal deficiencies also makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. For millions of years, we humans lived in small groups, and cooperation was essential for group survival. So shame, the emotion of shame, it's a very painful signal that motivates us to adapt our behavior and meet the group norms. I mean, shame comes with the fear of being expelled or rejected. It's the worst thing that can happen to a social animal. It's like death. So while most shame is no longer adaptive, we're slow to grow out of these millions of years of wiring. And the trance of unworthiness is pervasive today. We chronically feel like we're not meeting the standards, that we're falling short, and that we're going to be rejected in some way. So we fixate on the standards around us. I should have a certain kind of look. I should have a certain kind of body. And as we know, billions and billions of dollars are spent on cosmetic surgery, on diets, to try to meet those standards. We don't want to be ashamed of ourselves. We urgently want to meet the standards for intelligence, for popularity, for business success. Even in spiritual life, there are standards to meet. We're trying to be a certain kind of person. I'm going to share with you one of my favorite little essays about this. If you can sit quietly after difficult news, if in financial downturns you remain perfectly calm, if you can see your neighbors travel to fantastic places without a twinge of jealousy, if you can happily eat whatever is put on your plate and fall asleep after a day of running around without a drink or a pill, if you can find contentment just where you are probably a dog. You can understand why it's a favorite. So we have these standards to meet, and inevitably we feel like we're falling short, that we're deficient. And the key messengers that invoke shame and invoke our self-aversion actually are our family and caretakers. We get the message to work harder, perform better, don't be so needy and sensitive, look more attractive. We get these messages through our caretakers, but it's actually the society that's setting those standards. If we look deeply, we are thinking society's thoughts. And society gives us the standards and in a very deep way reinforces caste systems, feelings of superiority or inferiority on the basis of class or race or ethnicity or gender. And that amplifies the trance of unworthiness for many, many people. So aversion turned inward is one of the most fundamental expressions of human suffering. It obscures our true nature. It prevents us from seeing the gold, the goodness in ourselves and others. So our deep inquiry together is what helps us to remember and trust the gold, our true nature. What helps us? And this is where meditation practice, where training our awareness comes in, and in particular, where we'll be applying the rain meditation. Again, rain is a weave of mindfulness and compassion, and you can bring it to any situation that brings up emotional reactivity, whether it's the trance of unworthiness, our fear, our hurt, our anger. RAIN is an acronym, an English acronym. It stands for Recognize, Allow, Investigate, Nurture, which are 4 easy to remember steps that can be done quickly, right on the spot, or if we can't pause and be with our experience on the spot, in a slower fashion when you have time. RAIN can be applied to core issues, the deep ones, but also to daily reactivity. For instance, you might receive what feels to be an insulting email, and by briefly walking through the steps of RAIN, respond in a way that you don't later regret. Or you might be going to a job interview, and by taking 10 minutes ahead to bring RAIN to your fears, you can then communicate from significantly more confidence and calm. The steps of RAIN help us loosen the bind of painful emotions, and they bring us to a much more resourceful and calm state of mind. And as you'll see, they enable us to see through all states of mind to the presence and the love that's our essence. I've had more people tell me that RAIN has helped them through major life difficulty than any other practice. So let me tell you a story of what first motivated me to write my book, Radical Compassion, which is a guidebook to RAIN. This is what happened. My mother had moved down to live with me and my husband, and it was a particularly busy and demanding time. So I struggled with fitting her into my life because I felt so anxious about getting everything done that I was committed to. But I was also, as you can imagine, pained by the guilt of feeling that I was shortchanging time with her. So this triggered the trance of unworthiness. I started feeling bad about myself. And I decided to bring RAIN, which really wakes up our self-compassion, to the situation. So whenever I started feeling that anxious, guilty feeling, and I remembered, I would pause and go through the steps. I would recognize what I was feeling, and I'd allow the feelings to be there. That's a really important step. And then I'd investigate by really feeling them in my body and breathing with them. And then I'd nurture myself by reminding myself of my basic goodness, that I loved her, and just reminding myself of that. And it relaxed me. Each time I did it, I felt more trust and confidence that it would work out, and just more spacious and open-hearted. And it dramatically shifted my time with my mother. You know, when we were together, I could put aside other things and just really be with her. And when she died, and it was just 3 years later, of course I grieved deeply, and I didn't have regrets. Actually, I was filled with gratitude for the many moments of presence and of humor and tender companionship that we shared. So over the years, many of people have told me, rain saved my life. And I realized that rain saved my life moments with my mom. Okay, the first two steps of rain are recognize and allow, and they are the grounds of mindfulness. So rain is rooted in mindfulness, that attention to the present moment without judgment, recognize and allow. The second two steps, investigate and nurture, deepen that attention. Sometimes when we're really stuck, just the first two steps of mindfulness aren't enough. We need to actually deepen our attention and investigate and nurture. And that's what awakens a full, compassionate presence. I'd like to close this session by giving you an opportunity to explore the first two steps of rain, recognize and allow. And first, I'd like to share a story that highlights the power of these two steps. A man with early stage Alzheimer's, who was also a psychologist, was an experienced meditator, and he was describing to me how he presented to a group of 100 people right at the beginning of the onset of Alzheimer's. And as he began presenting, right at the very beginning, he went totally blank. And he didn't know why he was there or why all these people were looking at him expectantly. So here's what he did. First, he simply paused. He just didn't do anything. And then he started naming what he was experiencing and bowing. So it was like he'd say, confused, bow. Embarrassed, bow. Afraid, bow. Breathing, bow. Heart pounding, bow. Relaxing, bow. This is how he did it. And then he looked up after he had relaxed some and said, I'm sorry. And people that were listening were in tears. And someone in the audience said, no one has ever shared the teachings with us in this way. And what had he done? Well, he was basically doing the first two steps of rain, mindfulness. He had paused. He was naming and recognizing what was happening, and he was allowing it to be there, just bowing. And you might think of allowing as saying yes to the present moment. It's acknowledging without resistance what's happening. Yes doesn't mean we like it. It just means that we're honestly recognizing this is what's happening here. Let it be here. We're not fighting reality. So in this guided meditation we'll be doing, we'll first look at what happens and what it's like when we're not mindful, when we're resisting and saying no to the moment. And then we'll look at the power of mindfully recognizing and allowing, saying yes to our experience. Please sit in a comfortable way. Make any adjustments so that you feel you're alert and yet relaxed. You might close your eyes. And take a few long, slow breaths to collect your attention. Inhaling deeply, filling the lungs. And exhaling slowly, releasing tension or tightness with the out-breath. And again, deep in-breath, slow out breath. Letting the breath resume in its natural rhythm. Please bring to mind a current situation in your life that elicits a reaction of anxiety or anger or self-judgment. Not something that's traumatizing, that won't serve you, but just something that triggers you, brings up some fear, some irritation. Once you've decided on the situation, see if you can review it like a movie, pausing at the charged moments. So whenever you get to the place that's the worst part, pause the movie. And sense in these moments what's the most disturbing part of this, the worst part. What are you afraid is going to happen? What are you believing? What are you feeling? And as you sense what's going on inside you, begin to say no to it, to whatever you're feeling. In other words, mentally direct a stream of no at what you're experiencing, or let the word carry the energy of no. So you're rejecting, pushing away the unpleasantness. No might be communicating to yourself, this situation is bad, this person is bad, or I am bad and wrong. I don't like this. I don't want to feel this. So whatever you're experiencing, just send no to it. As if you're trying to make it all go away. And as you send this judgment of no, notice what that resistance feels like in your body. When you say no to an experience, when you want it to go away, what happens in your body? Do you feel tightness? Do you feel pressure? What happens to the feelings, the painful feelings as you say no? No to the fear, no to the anger. What happens? No, you shouldn't be here. I don't want to feel this. What happens to the feelings when you say no? imagine what your life would be like if for the next hours, weeks, months, you continue to move through the world with the thoughts and feelings of no. That when unpleasant experiences came up, you resisted and said no. What would your heart be like? Your consciousness? Okay, now take a few deep breaths. And if you'd like, shift your posture a bit. And we'll enter the second part of this meditation. Coming into stillness, you might again recall the situation that you brought to mind. Remember what's upsetting about it, the images, the words that you might have exchanged with another person that triggered you, the feelings. Let yourself get in touch with the worst part of it. And like the man in the story, recognize what it feels like, what's happening. But this time, in your own way, you'll be bowing by saying yes to the experience. So whatever you're experiencing, fear or anger in the body, you're just saying yes to the emotion, the feelings in your body. You're allowing them to be there. Yes to the hurt, yes to the irritation. You're not saying yes to another person's behavior, you're saying yes to your own experience. And if not the word yes, it's the energy of yes. The way it's a bowing and allowing for this to be here. It's like you're saying, this belongs, this is part of life. Notice what happens as you say yes, as you allow life to be as it is. Recognizing what's happening and just allowing it. The grounds of mindfulness. Whatever you notice coming up right now, see if you can meet it with that bow, with that energy of yes, letting it be there. And notice what happens. Is there softening, opening, and movement in your body? Is there more space and openness in your mind? As you continue to sit for these final moments, sense the possibility of recognizing and saying yes to whatever arises inside you. The changing sensations, feelings, sounds. Notice what happens if you let the yes, that bowing and allowing, go even deeper. What happens when there's no resistance, when life can be just as it is? Are you noticing the space that opens up, the space of presence? The poet Martha Postlewaite writes, "Create a clearing in the dense forest of your life." Create a clearing in the dense forest of your life. Can you sense how recognizing and allowing, saying yes to the moment, creates that sacred clearing? And please open your eyes now. And if you find it valuable, you might journal about what you experienced with no versus with yes, with resisting versus recognizing and allowing your experience. And thank you, my friends, for your attention. I'll look forward to being with you again for the next in this series.